For the Sunday morning nursery. Cheerful, smiling volunteers who love working with children are needed to staff our nursery. If you can help with the nursery rotation, please text or call Christy Chatham or Linda Neighbors. There will be a summer bash for the 5th grade and under on June 26th at 9:38 a.m. at the Chatham's house, and that'll be for fun, sun, and a water summer bash. They'll play in sprinklers, splash pad, and a mini pool, followed by lunch. And I'm sure that those of you who are parents would be welcome to hang around while they do that. One of the projects that we're working on right now is a shoe collection to distribute to some of the underprivileged school kids over in West Pasco County. We are collecting shoes in June and July, and we'll distribute to those in need. We're concentrating on shoes for school kids, but we'll take any and all good condition shoes. In the past, we've had people that have cleaned out their closets and brought those shoes there. We've had people who have gone to yard sales, and many times if they tell them what they're buying them for, we've had people donate the shoes from their yard sales. So that works. And also we've had some that have gone to places like Walmart and Payless Shoes and things like that and bought some relatively inexpensive shoes to donate to this. All of those shoes are absolutely appreciated. During my time with Pasco County Schools, I renovated and remodeled schools in that area, and I'm very familiar with the demographics of the people over there, and believe me, these are people who are in need. We will distribute these on August 1st, and for August 1st, we also know that at 5 o'clock, we have an appreciation dinner for the Pittmans, but this will start the shoe distribution will start about 1, and then usually we can get everything wrapped up, and you should be able to make it back for the Pittmans appreciation. There may be a slight possibility that may be moved a week, but we'll let you know as that develops. I've already mentioned the Pittmans appreciation dinner. There's a code in Sunday's bulletin to sign up for the dinner. Catering will be provided by Hungry Harry's Barbecue. Let Charlotte Kent know if you will attend. SunQuest 2021 is September 3 through 5. This is for 6th through 12th grade. Use the scan code on the bulletin. If you have questions, see Tim Jones. One of our former members, James Tickle, is asking for prayers. He's having some serious medical issues and some intense pain that may require spinal surgery in the very near future. I texted with him the other day, and he greatly covets your prayers and your support as he goes through this. Patty Hemingway is requesting prayers for Ron and Tricia Betterton, who both have serious health issues requiring surgery. They live in Alpharetta and would really appreciate the prayers of the church. Peter and Terry Franco have requested prayers for Sandy Rogaz, their son's mother-in-law. She's in the ICU following a heart attack and cardiogenic shock. Please pray for her recovery. Are there any others that we need to be mindful of this evening? Yes, Chris.
July 8th. She keeps continuing to have strokes. She's had 4 now in the last year. And last Friday they found a significant size blood clot on the back of her heart. And so to stop this from happening, they've got to go in there and do open heart surgery.
Okay. Any more? Let's go to our Father in prayer. Father in heaven, this evening as we gather, we are mindful that there are many who need your prayer or need your intervention in their health situations. James Tickle has asked for us to pray for him. Patty Hemingway has asked for us to pray for Ron and Tricia Betterton. And Peter and Terry Franco have asked us to pray for Sandy Rogaz. We also know that Chris's mom has had 4 strokes this year and is going to have some open heart surgery on July 8th. Father, we pray that you'll be with all of these and maybe those that we have not mentioned. And Father, we pray that you'll be not only with them, but that the medical staffs attending to them, that you'll guide their hands and return the health to these people. Father, we ask all things in Jesus' name. Amen. Let's turn to number 853 as we get started. You are getting ready to witness me do something that I dreadfully hate to do. I do not consider myself a musician by any stretch of the imagination, And while many people have a dread fear of standing up in front of people and talking, I have a dread fear of standing up in front of people and singing. And I am fully mic'd up, and I know that the entire internet world is going to have the opportunity to hopefully ignore me. But let's sing the very first verse of number 853. When we walk with the Lord in the light of His Word, what a glory He sheds on our way. While we do His good will, He abides with us still, and with all who will trust and obey. Trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus, but to trust and obey. Thank you. The last several weeks, we've been talking about who are we called to be. We've talked about some of the trials and stressors that we've had going on in our environment here, in our situation. We've talked about that in our nation we've had a number of things that have happened in the last year that have been seemingly set down here to divide us and to create tension and strife amongst us, the American people. We've also discovered that this is, in the course of mankind, in the history of mankind, this isn't anything new. There have always been these kinds of problems, and specifically, we've talked about some of the problems that we had in Ephesus and in Crete. We know that Ephesus was the home of the worship of the goddess Diana. I have to be very careful I don't say Princess Diana because they are not the same, okay? But this was the center of worship for the goddess Diana, who was a symbol of female fertility, female strength, and all things female. They even worshiped by having temple prostitutes as their priestesses. Historians tell us, you won't find this in the Bible, historians tell us that when Timothy was 80 years old, he was killed in the streets of Ephesus trying to preach to a parade that was honoring Diana. And there were those who didn't like what he was doing and drug him into the streets, and this parade trampled him to death. That's a pretty rough neighborhood, okay? We also talked about Crete. While their own people saw themselves as criminally greedy, that there was nothing that you couldn't do in the pursuit of what we would call the dollar, but they saw it being open game to create wealth. They talked about people organizing riots, seditions, and even civil war, all over money. And in the pastoral epistles, which is 1st and 2nd Timothy and Titus, Paul gives instructions to two young missionaries to go minister to Ephesus and to minister to Crete. Talk about a big challenge. As we studied, well, this worked a minute ago. Thank you, Joel. One of the things we're going to find as we study these pastoral epistles is that Paul holds up family relationships as the model for the relationships that we are to have here in the church. You know, we use the title brother and sister, but do we really mean it? Do we really treat each other as brother and sister, father and mother? Do we really do that? 1 Timothy 5, 1 through 3 says, "Do not rebuke an older man harshly, but exhort him as if he were your father. Treat younger men as brothers, older women as mothers, and younger women as sisters with absolute purity. Give proper recognition to those widows who are really in need. Titus 2, verses 1 and 2, Titus is instructed, "You, however, must teach what is appropriate to sound doctrine. Teach older men to be temperate, worthy of respect, self-control, and sound in faith, in love, and endurance." What do you suspect from what Paul has described to Titus here? What do you think he sees as being perhaps a shortcoming there in Crete as far as the older men are concerned? What do you think? Not very good role models. What do you have to do to teach somebody to be temperate? What's that word temperate mean to you? It's your answer. It's not right or wrong. What does it mean to be temperate? Not a hothead. Okay, somebody can control their temper. I guess it was all the time I spent in military policing. When I talk about somebody being tempered, I immediately think of someone who's not tempered as maybe having an affection for intoxicating beverages or drugs, and yes, they had those back then. But it also says after you do that, to be sound in the faith and in love and endurance. You see, we've talked about that Jesus, when he came to minister, he came with grace and truth. Here we see that he's talking about we've got to talk with grace here. Part of grace is teaching people how they should live and how they should behave. Mostly through our being a role model to them, but also to giving them some instructions, helping them through the times when maybe they have a problem with some kind of addiction. I know we've got Lance Baker here who's working with our men's ministry that's helping people with some addictions. That is an integral part of the role that we have as the church to society. So what we see here is wrapped up in these two passages we've looked at, that we see how we can balance, depending upon the individual, grace and truth. And this is what we are called to do. Paul goes on in Titus to say, "Likewise, teach older women to be reverent in the way they live, not to be slanderers or addicted to much wine, but to teach what is good. Then they can urge younger women to love their husbands and their children." What do you see Paul outlining here? What does this passage communicate to you?
One thing,
Okay.
and the disposition of the different members of the family. But the other thing I find interesting is that this is Titus is one of the couple places that you find the qualifications for bishops, and it's a pretty bad place to start looking for them,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Well, obviously Timothy and Titus have their work cut out for them, don't they? And there's going to have to be some time where there's going to be some development of these people as they go along to put them in the position that we need them to be. I was immediately struck that part of this passage talks about teaching the women not to be slanderers nor addicted to much wine. I hate to say it, but daytime TV, I'm retired now and I get to watch a little bit of daytime TV, and there's all kinds of talk shows on. How many of these talk shows, most of them hosted by women, involve them pouring each other a glass of wine before they get started talking? What does that communicate to the women in our society when they see these celebrities who have to have a glass of alcoholic beverage in their hand while they're talking and expressing their opinions. I hesitate to classify myself as either a Republican or a Democrat. I hate to classify myself as somebody who watches CNN or Fox News. Frankly, I take a little bit from all of it and try to mesh it all together and try to figure out what's going on. But I can tell you in all of those shows, because they have now become more op-ed pieces rather than reporting the news, we see slander. We see people being mischaracterized on all ends of the spectrum. Paul tells Titus, and he's directing it to women, but I think it applies to all of us, that we're not to do that. And this is something that Paul is to specifically teach people and train people not to do. We as Christians, as we build our Christian family, have to make sure that we're not slandering and that we're engaging, when we go out socially, that we're not engaging in what he's talking about here. So, this is something, and I have to tell you that some of the most disappointing times in my journey as a Christian is when I've been at various churches. I've been a youth deacon at a couple of different congregations. I was also a shepherd at another congregation before I came here. And inevitably, the rumor mill will start, and if you're going to serve in a role of leadership in any congregation, you might as well get used to people passing along mistruths, partial truths, and drawing totally erroneous conclusions about what you're doing. Some may call it gossip. Paul out and out just calls it what it is, slander. And while this is directed at women, it applies to all of us. So who are we to be? We're to be self-controlled, not hothead, not engaged in addicting behaviors, and doing our best to tell the truth. Now I realize that oftentimes if a situation happens here, and I've been in a number of police training classes where you'll have somebody sitting here and somebody will do something and then they'll turn and ask everybody, what did you see? And it all varies widely. So many times you don't know that you've misrepresented something. We have a remedy for that in Matthew, and that's go talk to the person before you begin to talk about what you think you might have seen or heard. Okay? Who are we to be? We're to be solid, self-controlled, and in control of not only our tongues, but our behaviors as well. He goes on to say to be self-controlled and pure, and again talking to the women, to be busy at home, to be kind, and to be subject to their husbands, so that no one will malign the word of God, and similarly encourage young men to be self-controlled. What's the role of women that Paul outlines here? He talks about taking care of the household, right? But what else? What else do you see? What else speaks to you from this passage? Yes.
To our husbands.
Be obedient to the husbands. Elsewhere in the Bible, Paul also says, husbands, love your wife as Christ loved the church. So guys, you don't get a free pass here. I've known many people, many guys to misquote these passages and say, basically, you're mine, you're my slave, you're chattel. And that's not what God ever intended. When he created Eve, he said, I'm creating a helpmate, creating somebody to be their partner, not somebody that you own and boss around, not somebody that you abuse. Yes. Lance, in here, if you raise your hand, I'm going to call on you. Oh, okay, that's fine. Verse 6, similarly, encourage young men to be self-controlled. How many mothers do you have in this congregation? How many mothers do you have in this congregation? The short, obvious, easy answer is one. But women are commissioned here to help train our young men, to train men how to be men. And what are our women training our young men to do? Huh?
Control themselves.
Control themselves. Be kind. Be leaders. All of this comes from the women. A very important, crucial role that has to be played. My mother stayed at home until all of us were well into school. I was in high school, and both my brothers were in all-day school, and before she began to work. And I will tell you, I learned more about the role of a responsible man in society from her than I learned anywhere else. It was my mom who always kept me in check. She was training me how to be self-controlled. I can think of numerous instances where I have to tell you I was a bit of a hothead as a preteen and a teenager, to the point that she got concerned enough that she pulled me to the side and said, if this continues, we're going to have to get you some help because you're getting beyond my ability to help out here. Women play a vital and key critical role in training our young men how to be men and how to be good Christian men. And to all of you women here who have sons, I applaud you. You do what you need to do. But you are the ones that help channel and create the good, responsible Christian men that we've had. I think of my grandmother doing the same thing. Interestingly enough, I see nothing in here that says you're only to teach your sons. You are a role model and an influence, women, on all of the young men in our congregation. I'll let you figure out what young man means. But that's part of your responsibility in the congregation. I hear ladies saying, well, I really can't be in leadership here in the church because I'm a woman. It says right here that you're to help teach young men to be self-controlled. You carry a great responsibility, and you are key and vital to us being able to do what we do. I said before that the organization of the church is that of a family. Should it be any surprise to us that in writing to Timothy, Paul will say these things. 1 Timothy 3, 1 through 6. If you got your Bibles, go ahead and turn there, please. 1 Timothy 3, 1 through 6. My middle schoolers will appreciate that I'm giving you time to find it. We work on this every Sunday. We give them a chance to learn how to navigate the Bible. Okay, I see most of you appear to have found it. 1 Timothy chapter 3, verses 1 through 6 says, "Here is a trustworthy saying, whoever aspires to be an overseer desires a noble task. Now the overseer is to be above reproach, faithful to his wife, temperate, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, able to teach, not given to drunkenness, not violent, but gentle and not quarrelsome, not a lover of money. He must manage his own family well and see that his children obey him, and he must do so in a manner worthy of full respect. If anyone does not know how to manage his own family, how can he take care of God's church?" You see, when it comes time to find elders to help lead a congregation, you do not see in here, well, be sure and get the local banker. be sure you bring him in on your team so that maybe you have access to resources you wouldn't have otherwise. It doesn't say go find the member of your congregation that is a highly successful professional in whatever field and has these advertisements on the television and the radio. Don't go out and find that military officer who commands many troops. What it says is, go find good family men who demonstrate these behavior characteristics. Because you see, we are a family. You are not one of my Air Force squadrons. You're not. And I can't lead you the same way that I would lead an Air Force squadron. It's just totally different. He must manage his own family well and see that his children obey him, and he must do so in a manner worthy of full respect. I always hesitate at that passage. It says he must see that his children obey him and must do so in a manner worthy of respect. There are ways of managing your children. And I'm not totally against capital punishment. There are parents who become abusive. You don't have to look very far in the news or on the news on TV where parents have done such things as lock their kids in closets for extended periods of time. You don't have to go very far to see children who have been subject to brutal physical abuse. One that will always stick with me was a parent who, in trying to, got frustrated with their child and doused them in boiling water, gave them third-degree burns. That is not a respectable way to get your child to behave and to obey you. There are other resources if it gets to that point that you've totally lost control of yourself. There are people that can help you, and I would implore you, seek help before you do some of these abusive things. Ruth saw more than her share of children with radial arm fractures from children having had their arms twisted so much to the point that they break. What it says here is that they take care of their children, make their children obey them, but in an acceptable manner worthy of full respect. As shepherds, as we work with you, as we help lead this congregation, I'm to do the same thing. I'm to help get you to the point of obedience in a manner worthy of full respect. Unfortunately, I've known of people who abused that power position as well. What other thoughts do you have on this passage? Yes.
As you were talking about, being a boss in a work setting or whatever, and when you're in that situation, a leader in that situation, you want to be kind and concerned about people and all, but it's a totally different thing than when you're a leader in your family. You love your family to such an extent. I think that's what he's telling us here. When you're a leader in God's church, it's with love that you lead, which is a different type of leadership than you would in a secular setting.
In a secular setting, you've got that paycheck, that people are working for the paycheck. You don't have that paycheck necessarily in your home. You have to lead from love and train your children and create the environment where they love you in return. Now, all of us who've raised teenagers, we know that doesn't always, there are periods where we'll hear that our share of I hate yous and I can't believe you're doing this and all of that. Love covers a multitude of sins, we're told in the scriptures. And it's up to us as parents to do that. And same thing for us as shepherds. We are to lead in such a way that we elicit response by our love, not because we have any kind of a coercive entitlement or any kind of a coercive reward to give them. So we see here that that's what elders are expected to do. Further down in 1 Timothy in chapter 3, drop down to verse 8, and we'll talk about deacons. In the same way, deacons are to be worthy of respect, sincere, not indulging in much wine, and not pursuing dishonest gain. That's going to be a tough nut to crack if you're in first century Ephesus or Crete. Okay? They must keep hold of the deep truths of the faith with a clear conscience. They must first be tested, and if there is nothing against them, let them serve as deacons. Interesting that Paul would once again mention not addicted to much wine. It's prevalent. It's prevalent in our society. And like I say, you can't even watch daytime TV and not see hosts of various programs sitting there with a bottle of wine and pouring, serving one another with the wine. The final point that he makes here let me back up. They must keep hold of the deep truths. Okay, in the same way, women are to be worthy of respect, not malicious talkers, but temperate and trustworthy in everything. Here we're talking about the deacons' wives. And the same thing applies to elders' wives. Chris? Oh, I thought you were getting ready to say something.
But I think that interwoven through everything you've been talking about is behind every successful man and successful family is a good wife, a good mother. When we were young men, we were talking about we all go through a time when we don't think our parents know what they're talking about very much, and we question everything our fathers do, and that can either be encouraged by the mother, or it can be she can encourage us to respect our father and our leaders, such that we grow up in a similar fashion. And so many times, the best people can look back and say, I had a good mother that taught me respect, taught me when to be the way I should be, and she told me when not to do what I want to do. And it seems that here they had the same thing. There were women who were gossips and slanderers and divisive people, and that led to problems. And there were women who were good people, and it was pretty obvious probably to everybody who those were.
Yeah. And the other thing that goes along with this, and I told Bobby and Jim when they asked me to join the eldership, I told them straight up, you get me, you get Ruth. And on our latest rounds of appointments, we told them very clearly that we expect that when we bring Chris on, we get Charlotte. When we brought Shaq on, we knew we would get Cindy. Because we are a team, we are one. And we understand, we complement and supplement each other, and we understand that that's the way things are supposed to be, and Paul intimates that here. A deacon must be faithful to his wife and must manage his children and household well. Those who have served well gain an excellent standing and great assurance in their faith. Paul tells Timothy, and we've kind of beat this one a little bit, but the leadership of a congregation are to be family men and their wives. Now, Ruth doesn't get a separate title like First Lady or anything like that. If you've seen the TV show Greenleaf, I don't know how many of you have seen that, but the pastor's wife there is recognized as First Lady and all that. But we are a team. It recognizes that we're a team. Just as we were a team raising our children, we taught them to respect us, we respect them. Doesn't mean we always agree. Doesn't mean that some might get excited from time to time. But it's always out of respect and always out of love. And we've always been able to pull it back together. And that's how it should be in the church as we develop this Christian community, this Christian family that we're all working towards. Well, so how do we build all these relationships, both as a congregation and as individuals? Last week, you were given a model. Shaq gave you a great model on how to begin to develop relationships. It starts with activity. Activity leads to trust. I can tell you, you get out there on the ball field and you play baseball or football or whatever with one another, after a while there's a certain level of trust. You depend on each other physically out there, and then mentally and emotionally you begin to build trust as well. And it doesn't have to be a sports activity. Whatever it is that you might do, whatever activity you might involve with, as people begin to know one another and begin to experience one another and begin to communicate, a trust level will begin to develop that we can all work from. Once we have trust, that leads to intimacy. Now, what are you talking about, Bill? Intimacy is when you begin to talk about things that normal people don't normally talk about with each other. Those deep, dark values that maybe you haven't expressed in a while. Who you really are. You know, we're all told that when you meet together with your family at Thanksgiving and Christmas, don't talk about politics and religion. That's because some people never get past a little bit of trust on over to intimacy. And we're talking about things that you wouldn't talk about with everybody else. You know, this is not barbershop talk. You go to the barbershop, you talk news, weather, sports, right? And you got to have something beyond your favorite baseball team, football team, something like that, to be able to begin to develop this intimacy that will allow you to begin to talk about Jesus, to begin to talk about the Christian way of life. You know, we talked about earlier in this series that something like 60% of the world out there, they've heard about Jesus, but they don't want to engage in the Christian lifestyle. But once we can get to intimacy and begin to talk through these things, then it leads to impact. And that's where people begin to change their lives. It's a long process, and not every person you deal with and begin your journey through this system are you going to be able to take all the way to impact. Aristotle talked, because this impact and intimacy level of relationship is what Aristotle would talk about in terms of pure friendships. Aristotle said that most people only really have room for about 5 or 6 pure friendships in their life. The rest are either utility friendships which are based on I have something you want, you have something I want, and we have an exchange. Might be your real estate agent. You know, when you were looking at those houses, and even though you made them show you 100 houses, they were always very nice to you, occasionally bought you lunch, talked about things, talked about the kids and what they're doing and all that. Once that's over, there's no more friendship there because the utility is gone. You might get into a pleasure friendship, which is based purely upon mutual activities. Both of you have kids on the same Little League team. You enjoy some of that, but finally one day Little League goes away, and guess what? You're not there anymore. Maybe you even went to a couple of ball games together, maybe went out to eat a couple of times. But once the activity or once the pleasure is gone, then that friendship goes away. No, what Paul's talking about here is the pure friendship, which is what we're supposed to be developing with one another. And the only way we do it is by associating with one another, communicating with one another, and these sorts of things. As we go into the world, we must balance the message with grace and truth. And we've talked about that, and we showed how Paul outlined how we can do that. Another observation that I have as we move forward here is to remember that the church was created for the world and not in opposition to the world. What do you think about that? The church was created for the world, not in opposition to the world. Yes?
I think it's kind of like we're supposed to be in the world, not of the world, but we're not supposed to be on the complete opposite side of the spectrum against the world. We're supposed to be bringing the world into us.
Right.
Bringing them up to heaven.
We're supposed to be bringing the world into the church. So the church was created so that we have somewhere to bring them, right? And we're not to be of the world. We are not in opposition to the world. I will tell you, there is not one individual out there in this great big wide world that should be your enemy. Not one. This was something as a young military officer I had to really wrap my head around. And I know some people don't like that term, wrap my head around, but it's something I had to really figure out how that worked. Ephesians 6:12 tells us, For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realm. Paul tells the Ephesians, now remember, these are the same Ephesians that Timothy is going to minister to. The one where the goddess Diana is being worshipped and immoral things are happening in those temples in the name of worship. And he says, our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but it's against the rulers, the powers, and the authorities, and the powers of this world, and against the spiritual forces of evil. That's Satan. Yes.
Confusing thing for a lot of people in the church and the concepts that have been misused over the centuries. The adage, hate the sin, not the sinner. And so, people mix up whether the world or the people or what the world teaches and what the people of the world are running towards instead of running from. And so there's so many things that the New Testament teaches us and throughout that we should hate about the things, the sins and the things that most of the world are involved in. Right. But we confuse that with then if people are doing that, we should dislike the people. Right. Or hate or make them our enemies. And our enemy is Satan and the things that Satan is luring them with, not the people that are actually doing those things.
Satan is the enemy. And that extends even to that obnoxious neighbor that seems to have more time to worry about my stuff than their own stuff, right? They're not our enemy. Satan may be prompting them to do that because Satan knows that gets under my skin and might cause me to develop a hate relationship with that person, which is also sinful, right? Ron?
I mentioned communication, I think, last week, but continuity comes to mind when we start talking about holding different classes for different ages and so forth. Yeah. In other words, this kind of thing needs to be talked about up front with all the classes to begin with. So, just hypothetically, if Ruth was going to correct my son or daughter, I would understand that was the right thing, that she should be doing that, and they did something that deserved that, and support that rather than the opposite.
I don't know about the neighborhood you guys grew up in. I see a whole bunch of gray hairs in here and no hairs. I don't know. Sorry about that. I don't know about you. Every woman in my neighborhood thought they were and had authority from my mom to correct me if they saw me doing something I wasn't supposed to be doing. Every one of them. I couldn't leave a 3-block radius of my house without having a mother standing there watching what I was doing. It seems to be the most recent generation that's taken exception to that. You can't talk to my kid that way. I know when I taught middle school, I remember growing up, if I got into a little bit of trouble at school, I knew that I was going to get double whatever they gave me. Even in the late 90s when I was teaching middle school, I was shocked at the number of parents who came up, and even with the most blatant offense, it wasn't the kid's fault, and I was being harsh by doing something about it. That's Satan. Yes, sir.
When our kids were little, I think there was that kind of relationship in the church where Brian's nodding his head. All of the parents kind of had a shared responsibility to raise the kids, and if they caught him doing something wrong, or I caught their kid doing something wrong, I had a responsibility, not just the opportunity to correct and say, this is not the right thing to do. And I think that it kind of goes back to what Paul is trying to teach Timothy and Titus, is that you're supposed to model Christ to everyone around you, whether they're a woman or a man, an elder or a deacon or a church member. We're really all called to that same standard. And some will be called to leadership. Right. Even if you're not called to leadership, You're still called to that same standard.
You're still called to be a Christian, right? You're still called to do these things. I can tell you that as a kid growing up, I knew if one of my other mothers saw me do something and said something to me, that would strike fear in my heart. Because I knew that as soon as she walked in, she'd be on the phone talking to my mother, and it was going to be a whole lot worse than I had just done. So that kind of kept us where we needed to be. We are called, all of this requires a tremendous amount of faith. We are called to be faith-filled, big-thinking, bet-the-farm risk-takers when it comes to our Christianity. We should never insult God with small thinking or safe living. Mark 6, verses 1 through 6. Jesus left there and went to the hometown and accompanied by his disciples when the Sabbath came. He began to teach in the synagogue, and with many who heard him were amazed. Where did this man get these things? They said. Sorry, I got ahead of my notes here. Where do they get these things? He asked. What's the wisdom that's been given to him? What are the remarkable miracles he is performing? Isn't this the carpenter's son? Isn't this Mary's son and the brother of James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon? Aren't this his sisters with us? And they took offense at him. Okay, next. Next. Jesus said to them, a prophet is not without honor except in his own country, in his own town, among his relatives and his home. He could not do any miracles except to lay the hands on a few sick and to heal them. He was amazed at their lack of faith. Jesus was not respected in his hometown. They had seen this little boy running around, never sinning, of course, because he didn't do that. But many of them said, where did he get all this knowledge? Where did he get all this wisdom? And he was amazed at their lack of faith. After all, he'd been there his whole life, and he was amazed. There's another incident where we have a woman caught in the act of adultery, and you know the story. Jesus was there teaching, and then the scribes and the Pharisees brought this woman who'd been caught in the act of adultery and threw her out in a circle in front of Jesus and said, what do you think of her? They were trying to trap Jesus. And as they were continuing to press him for a response, Jesus went down and kneeled in the dirt and began to write something on the dirt. And then he said, let he who is without sin be the first to cast a stone. Because the punishment for adultery was stoning. One by one, they all left. And then he looked up at the lady and said, where have your accusers gone? And then he responded to her, you go and do likewise. Go and sin no more. And she was amazed at what had happened. What was the difference between the amazement Jesus had over the reaction of the people in his hometown compared to the amazement of of the woman who'd been caught in adultery? Same words used there, but I suspect totally different response, right? What was Jesus' amazement?
In his hometown, he was amazed at their lack of faith.
He was amazed that they couldn't see who he was. He said, I can't believe I've been here this long. I can't believe that they didn't see the Father through me. After all, at age 12, he had hung back at the temple because he needed to be about his Father's business. They all knew that. They all knew that story. And his was a disappointment amazement. I just cannot believe this. On the other hand, we have the amazement of the woman who was caught in adultery. And what would her amazement be? how would it be characterized?
She wasn't punished. Her amazement was that she was not punished.
That she wasn't punished. It was a very happy, joyous amazement. We are to be amazed at Jesus. We are to be amazed at the things that he does, and not just because it's we're beginning to run out of time, so we're going to skip ahead here a little bit. Here's 3 faith-filled facts. You cannot play it safe and please God. In Hebrews 11:6 it says, "And without faith it is impossible to please God." Without faith, it's impossible to please God. If you don't have faith that Jesus Christ died for your sins so that you have the opportunity and that he came here to do that for you, that's a lack of faith. And you cannot, it's impossible. You can't play it safe and please God. I've heard people say, well, I've gone over, I've attended religion X and religion Y, and I want to make sure I've got all my bases covered. There was a popular war movie not long ago that talked about this guy that had worshipped at a lot of different religious sects. So I just want to make sure I keep my bases covered. You can't play it safe and please God. Here's something I want you to think about. As long as you have to have a guarantee, you don't have faith. If you're looking for a guarantee, you don't have faith. Faith is confidence in what we hope for will actually happen, and gives us assurance of the things we cannot see. Faith in this regard, now I don't study the ancient languages, but those who do tell me that the faith that's being referred to here is the kind of faith that I would have if I bought a ticket to go see the Rays tonight. I would have this ticket and I would have the hope that I'm going to get there and I'm going to get in, and then that's all going to happen. That faith is not the hope of, well, let me drive down there and see if I can score a good deal on a ticket. That totally different uses of the word. The faith we're talking about here is the faith that it will happen, that if we do what God has told us to do, it will happen. You can have faith or you can have control, but you can't have both. This may not work. Trust God and try to find out if it works. Here's an example of the building of this facility. Bobby, you were here. We had worshiped with people from this congregation before this building was built, but there were 88 people who stepped out on faith, who took that faith-filled, big risk, bet the farm faith approach and produced this building that you're sitting in now. If you think about it, 88 people coming up with over $1 million to be able to build this place. And I know none of those people were wealthy by any stretch of anybody's imagination. Bobby's laughing over there. But it was by faith and trusting that God would deliver, and they ran into many obstacles, but you know what? Here is living proof that by stepping out on faith, something really tremendous happened. To step towards your destiny, you have to step back away from security. By faith, Abraham, when he was called to go to a place that he would receive his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. Hebrews 11:3. It would have been easy for Abraham to say, hey, things are pretty good here, things are safe, they're secure, I know what I'm doing. But he didn't do that. He stepped out on faith and went to do what he was told to do. So how about here? How do you show your faith here? Maybe you start a life group. Maybe you volunteer to be a facilitator at one of our life groups or be a host home. Maybe you do it by increasing your giving from 2% to 5%, maybe to 7%, maybe to 10%. Serve in one of our ministries, or better yet, Start your own ministry. And I know that there's some people here who do some things that others might not necessarily envision being a ministry, but I know there's groups of people that get together to write cards to people. I know there are groups of people that get together to play cards in the afternoon. They're having that activity. They're building a bond. They're relating to one another. They're communicating with one another, and they're growing with one another. It doesn't have to be hard. How many of you guys like to golf? I don't, but if you like to golf, why not start your own golf league? I've known places where they had softball teams, where guys would get together. That was the activity, which leads to these other things that we talked about. You probably know the needs of those in the sphere of your influence. Do something about it. Trust in God and go through it. So what do we do here? How can you work here? Get involved in our distant missions, which has kind of been set on the back burner because of COVID, but that will be back. Develop programs and activities to help bring in families with children. How about you identify a mission effort here locally? We've been supporting Messengers of Hope, and they do great work. But we're not opposed to starting something else. If you know of an area here that could use our help and use the things that we can do, start an effort that way. What else? How else can we do that? I know that with the brain power that we have in here, you'll come up with something because you know people and you know situations that the rest of us don't. Well, I appreciate your time and attention this evening, and thanks for coming tonight. And those of you out there in the cyber world, we're glad that you're here, and you're just as much a part of us as those who are actually here this evening. Thank you very much.